Hello and welcome to a Sunday Reflection. My name is Paul Harvey and this is Life, Passion and Business. We're about helping you explore, finding your passion for life and the work that you do. But it's so much more than that. It's about finding clues to the big life questions. What does it mean to be successful? What is the meaning of life? If you're looking for more, then join me on this journey where together we will discover through interviews, tools and tips how to live life full of meaning, passion and purpose. Hello and welcome to a reflection. I have a question for you. How vulnerable are you prepared to get? And I have to say this conversation is a challenge for me because I will need to get vulnerable while making this podcast. It's a continuation of last week's program where we talked about failure and forgiveness. And that little monster reared its head, that monster of shame. Shame is something that builds up when we notice that we are not as good as other people around us. And it's this thing about where we compare something, and it's about the shoulds. I should be able to do this. I should be able to lose weight. Shame is also society driven. So all of these are all the things that we touched on last week about the power of shame. Shame is something that can happen as a direct result of being rejected when we are vulnerable or being criticized when we have been vulnerable. It's also one of the reasons that we avoid vulnerability, the fear of being shamed. So what is vulnerability and why is it important? It's interesting because the word vulnerability is often used in context of facing danger, the ability to counter or survive an attack. So we talk about our computer systems being vulnerable to attack. We talk about the vulnerability of healthcare systems or of machinery or plant or things. So these are all kind of the physical sense that it's about an attack. Actually, it's about the ability to survive an attack. And yet human vulnerability is not about attack. It's about trust. It's about surrender. Because when we're vulnerable, this is where we find love, empathy, and creativity. Because the vulnerability that we experience is about being open to opportunity, trusting what comes, and allowing the possibility of failure. If we want to lead an exciting life, we have to be prepared to be vulnerable. I can tell you from experience, as a child I was incredibly vulnerable. I was very susceptible to what was said to me. I was very wounded by things that happened around me. I mentioned last week my education, being on the black table. I had teachers regularly call me stupid. And it has taken me many years to get used to my own writing and to establish that I have something worth saying. But the net result of a lot of those early years of shame and rejection of me, of who I was, and my limitations. And the net result of that was I learnt or developed a hard shell. I developed a place that I could hide, a place that I could cover my own vulnerability. And it meant that in my 20s, I was emotionally unavailable. While I could express myself, I couldn't express my passion, my joy very well, or my love very well. And many of my relationships happened in my early 20s. When it came to expressing my feelings to women or friends, I didn't know how. Some people go for their entire life like this, and they adopt strategies or behaviors that avoid it. The macho thing with men, drinking, all these kind of things are there to avoid getting too close to feelings, is a diversionary tactic to avoid an emotional conversation. And it was, for me, it was a massive cathartic experience when I discovered the world of performance and acting. And I put myself in a position where I had to experience my hurt, my pain, my vulnerability. I remember taking part in a 2-week acting workshop, and I started crying on Tuesday, and I pretty much cried for most of the week. And I cried for the hurt and for the journey that my child had gone on and this young adult and who I was. And when I came out of those 2 weeks, I was a completely different person. It was a place of rebirth for me. And I notice it's quite easy to slip back into that place because I was there for 20 odd years or more. And it's really easy to slip back into that place of non-feeling. But I also recognize the benefits of being vulnerable, and I can be incredibly vulnerable. As you will know, my son left home recently, and we've had many a tearful conversation with me doing the crying. And it's a tears of joy, but there's also me sharing how I feel in this relationship, the fact that I am open to the fact that I miss him and prepared to say that to him. And it's fascinating because I know my parents never said that to me. I didn't realise how much they missed me when I left home. So it really is refreshing that I felt able to do this differently. And I'm teaching my son to be vulnerable with me as well. I don't know if you've seen the song The Monsters with James Blunt, but that song at the moment really gets me, and it has been getting me for months. And I think it's his vulnerability with his vulnerability. It's his vulnerability singing with his father, who he knows is dying, and the recognition of their relationship. And that to me is amazing stuff. And that is raw vulnerability between two people, two human beings, and it's connection. And that's the point. I share the connection with my son. The other place where I'm really vulnerable is this podcast. The launching of this podcast took me 6 months from concept to actually putting it out there in the world. And it was partly because I was so nervous about putting my words out in the world and doing what I do here. And even sharing this conversation with you today does make me feel slightly nervous. But I've done this enough now. I've practiced this enough to know that it's worth it. It's worth sharing this stuff with you. Because that's the point. When we set ourselves up, when we set ourselves to do something that is hard, something that is difficult, where there is the potential to fail, what we're doing is we're making ourselves vulnerable to the opportunity. That can be telling the person that you're with that you love them. That can be having a difficult conversation with a child, a lover, a friend. It can be having a beautiful conversation with someone you want them to be a lover. It is the reaching out to a business contact and asking for a favour or asking for help. It is about taking a risk and stepping out of the comfort zone, because the real riches to life are on the other side of difficult. What I notice in the world over the last few years, and we see it in politics, we see it around big issues, is there's an entrenchment in one side or the other. And a determination of what I know is true, and a resistance to the possibility that it might not be. And what that actually is, it's a resistance. It's a desire to avoid vulnerability. If everything you know was wrong, if what you thought was true wasn't true, then you'd have to address the possible fear, the implications of that not being true, and hence make yourself vulnerable to the possibility of change and failure. So you begin to see how powerful this tool of vulnerability is, this thing that we spend so much time avoiding. Being vulnerable is about making a connection with others and sharing your humanity. I also suspect the lack of vulnerability is one of the primary causes of midlife crisis. What they've done is they've lost connection to their vulnerability, and in that process they disconnect with the world around them, and they've disconnected with life. As we settle into comfortable monotony, and then they get to wonder what the hell life's about because they're no longer connected with it. This is borne out by the crisis in lonely men. Men in their 50s and 60s, many of them do not have big friend networks. They may have business connections and business colleagues, but they don't have the same quality of friendships that their female counterparts have. And I suspect much of this is because they don't take the time to get vulnerable and to make the connections they need to. And hey, I could put myself in the same bracket. I have not paid enough attention to my own friend circle over the last few years. While that's a safe place to be, it doesn't contain the riches that are there to be found from taking a risk, from stepping out and being vulnerable. While someone might be happy sitting in their midlife comfort, the universe often delivers things that take us out of that comfort. So divorce, bereavement, illness, all these things force us to address and be with our vulnerability, and in a way leads to the crisis. So the question is, how do we recapture our sense of adventure, this idea that we can allow ourselves to be vulnerable and take a risk? Well, I suggest you start small. Find something that you want to do, you've always wanted to do. Something that would be an edge for you. Most of the time, I think those edges involve talking to people, talking to new people. What I can say to you on most of those situations is people don't bite. I would advise not to express your undying love to someone you have just met in the street, because I think that might be a bridge too far. If it is about connecting with people, start small. Think about it in terms of, how does the dating process work? We do coffee before we do dinner. We meet somehow. We start that journey slowly. And that's how you start, by getting vulnerable. That's how you learn to recapture your vulnerability. And if you've never been there before, if you've spent a lifetime avoiding vulnerability like I did in my 20s, or you think it's time to really push the boat out and discover what's possible, then it might be time to seek some help or seek some outside process. And that can be a coach. That can be a coach like myself, or that can be a course or something. I probably would recommend doing some of these courses, because some of these things where there's a group of people together, all on the same journey, it is much easier and you do learn so much from it. I did many courses over the years, working with a group of people, and had so much fun. And some of the people became very good friends. So it's really, really worth doing it. I appreciate with current conditions in a COVID world that may not be quite so easy, but we're opening up, so those courses probably will be starting again. You might want to look for things about creativity. You certainly could look for performance type things, because they will challenge you, but what you discover when you are practicing to perform something is amazing. You discover parts of yourself that didn't exist, and you make some amazing connections and friendships with people. And the reason that works is because we're all sharing in that same vulnerability. If you watch someone practicing to perform something, and then they watch you do the same, you both learn out of the experience. Actually, just talking about this is making me realize I want to get back into some performance stuff. Interesting. And that is why vulnerability is so critically important. It is the glue that holds us together with our fellow mankind, with our family, with our friends, with humanity, with this planet. When we can be vulnerable about how we feel about something, there is a connection which transcends all else. And that's it for this week, my episode on vulnerability. If you've got any viewpoints on vulnerability, please write me a comment. Let's have a conversation. If you don't want to write a comment, drop me a line at paul@lifepassionandbusiness.com is the email address. Do check out the website lifepassionandbusiness.com, where you will find all of the episodes here and some resources underneath the resources tab which would support you on your journey. Please remember, if you have enjoyed this podcast, if you enjoy any podcast, please support your content creators with likes, shares and reviews, because that's how this ecosystem grows and thrives. And it helps other people like yourself find good podcasts. As always, thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'll catch you next time. All the best.